We have to ensure that the biodiversity, scenery and cultural heritage of the Wild Coast are preserved, while at the same time promoting wise development that will facilitate economic growth in the region. Wise words written by the Deputy Minister of Finance, Mcebisi Jonas, when he was still the MEC for the Eastern Cape Department of Economic Development and Environmental Affairs. He wrote that in the foreword to a book by John Costello and Div de Villiers, Mkombati and the Wild Coast, lovely coffee table book which displays really the incredible beauty of the Wild Coast. But since writing those words, Mr. Jonas has been involved in two very significant decisions which I'm having a hard time trying to reconcile. The first is his laudable decision not to be captured within the Gupta's whole state capture conspiracy. The second was his decision to go along with Treasury's decision to allocate money in the midterm budget review to the domesticating of the Wild Coast. 2.5 billion or thereabouts has apparently been allocated to SANRAL to enable them to commence the construction of 2 mega bridges over the Mtentu and Imzakaba River gorges, which are the two pivots of SANRAL's grand scheme to shorten the N2 route between Port Shepstone and Umtata by about 80 or so kilometres. So the November edition of Noseweek has a story which I've written about it, so go and get hold of that. But since writing this article, I've since learned from SANRAL's own admission that the bridges are beyond the engineering design expertise of South African engineers, so they're going to have to source international skills and expertise, which of course means that a percentage of the 2.5 billion for these bridges is going offshore. Now, where have we heard that before? Well, this picture paints 1 million unpaid e-toll bills. I need not say much more, except that Treasury had to bail out SANRAL on the e-toll scheme, and now Deputy Minister Jonas is apparently going along with putting more of taxpayers' money into SANRAL for something which I am convinced will ultimately amount to as much a tax abuse as the e-tolls has been, and something considerably worse. Because as SANRAL has routinely done in other projects, they are characteristically pushing ahead with the bridge building scheme before they have obtained full legal clearance. There is a High Court review pending challenging the environmental authorization of the N2 Greenfields Road, which has been brought by the directly affected local residents. But SANRAL have already awarded contracts to commence the construction of what they call haul roads to the 4 sites of the abutments of each of the bridges. Work has started, money is being spent, and SANRAL appear not to care that they are again showing contempt for the rule of law and due process. It was bad enough for them to do that against the Gauteng residents on the e-toll saga and the Western Cape residents in the city of Cape Town over the N2, N1 Cape Wineland scheme. But the Cape Town and Gauteng residents are relatively better able to challenge the injustice because they have the resources. But when SANRAL start using lawfare tactics against vulnerable rural residents, it is more than just unsporting, more than just wasteful expenditure or tax abuse. It starts shading toward becoming diabolical. Okay, that could just be the extremist view of a social worker who you might say has become far too over-identified in the Amapondo in their development struggle over the last decade. Well, to open up this whole issue, on Tuesday this week, that being the 15th of November 2016, Advocate Jeff Budlander and attorney Cormac Cullinan flew up from Cape Town to defend them against the latest attack of SANRAL's lawfare strategy. It turned out the judge had not read all the legal papers and therefore was not prepared to hear the case and decided to postpone the matter. That has the effect of now driving up the legal costs, frustrating the parties, and worsening an already bad situation. To make the best of the bad situation, I decided to sit Cormac down with the SWC chair, Margie Pretorius, to unpack the injustice of the situation and try and explain the background and why we believe that the N2 Wild Coast Toll Road saga is not just simply about a road. It is about the shape of South Africa's future and what road we appear still to be following. Cormac, you've been involved here for 2002, World Summit for Sustainable Development, we first met. This N2 Wild Coast Toll Road does have a very long history. Just give us a quick overview of where it started and why it was important for you to kind of get stuck in and dealing with it.
Well, like many South African families, I'd been lucky enough to spend childhood holidays on the Wild Coast, so it was a place which I loved and valued for its wildness and its incredible beauty. So when I heard that a number of road building companies had put together an unsolicited bid to SANRAL to build a road through the Wild Coast as a means of creating work for themselves, I thought it was a fundamentally bad idea. One of the concerns, of course, is that although this is an area of incredible biodiversity, it's one of, I think it's about 36 global biodiversity hotspots. It's incredibly beautiful. It's probably the last remaining significant coastal area in South Africa which hasn't been ruined by development. Despite the fact, all of these factors which suggested that you shouldn't put a road through the middle of it, it was, I felt, very important to hear what the local people thought about this project. And I can remember speaking to you from the early days and you talking about your horseback trip with the Amadiba horse trails and speaking to local people and their concerns about the impact that this road would have on them and the fact that it would make the mining of the dunes in the area much more likely. And so from the outset we felt it was very important that if this matter was going to be taken forward, it should be with the support of the local communities, and that as people who don't live in the area we could raise issues about environmental impacts, etc. But probably the much more significant impacts were going to be on the people whose ancestral lands and communities were going to be bisected by this road, and particularly in circumstances where it was being imposed against their will.
Nazar Ali has been punting this N2 Wild Coast Toll Road has been something he sees as being essentially motivated to bring benefit to the impoverished Eastern Cape.
I think how this particular project started was the road building companies, construction companies didn't have enough work, so they started putting together proposals that would create work for them throughout South Africa, and this was one of them. And at an early stage, one of the critics of this scheme had been Bishop Jeff Davies, whose diocese was in that area, and he was subsequently transferred to Cape Town, and Nazir Ali arranged to meet with him at Bishop's Court in Cape Town to try and persuade him that this road was in the interests of the local people. And Bishop Davies invited me to sit in on that meeting. And I can remember very clearly Nazir Ali was trying to argue that the main rationale behind the road was uplifting poor rural people. In other words, it was a development objective. It wasn't primarily to do with expanding the South African roads network, it was to help local people. And I said to him very mildly, as I thought, but surely if you wanted to spend billions on developing the area and uplifting local people, it wouldn't make sense to choose a toll road as a big means of doing that. Toll roads are not something which are going to uplift local communities, enhance human well-being in the area, etc. And he went off pop. He got extremely angry and went red in the face and really said, how dare you accuse SANRAL of not caring about people, etc., etc. But the reality is quite simple. This road is about a high-speed, limited access toll road between Durban and East London that may benefit people who wish to move freight or move quickly between Durban and East London, but it's not at all motivated by the interests of the local people. It's not what they want, and perhaps most importantly, they have not been given the opportunity which the law requires them to be given to participate in the decision-making process. So it's not only a bad idea in my view, it's a violation of the laws of South Africa and the Constitution of South Africa, which is seeking to be put in place a democracy in which everybody's voices matter, and particularly the voices of those who are most affected by a proposed project like this, which is being advanced by a government agency.
But people here, they hate it when outsiders come in and tell them that they are poor. We are not dependent on shops, on grocery shops. They produce their own food. The people here, they've got livestock, they've got the cows.
Hayi ngesikwazi ukudedela thina ngoba bathi thina sithe asiyifuni mine akho nto soba sayizuza sozibonela ukuba uzokwakha phi ukwakha ke kunzima ke xa usuka apha ungaplananga ubuzokwakha ngantoni uzofike kondawo wakhe ngantoni udle ntoni uba thina abantwana bebaninzi bebangaka.
They are also opposing SANRAL's plan to extend the N2 highway through the area. The community suspects that the new road is intended to service the proposed mine.
The road to be coming up and then just inland here, passing very close to Mdaja High School. If you bring in the highway here, you are going to attract an influx of people to come in here to choke up the land for sites, the grazing land, the crop fields.
Now let's talk a bit about Sinagugu, because he is the applicant now. He's trying to, waiting for the day in court. There's been endless delays because of interlocutory applications by SANRAL postponing it. My concern for Sinagugu is that it puts people like himself, like Lolo and others, in an increasingly in a vulnerable position. So not only is it not going to have a developmental benefit, it's actually having a fundamentally undermining impact of shredding that social fabric and creating division. What options do we have to bring that to the awareness of the South African public and to our politicians?
Well, I think one of the difficulties is that you have people in government, many of whom who sincerely believe that the best way of helping people in this area is through mega projects, like a big toll road, a proposed mega dam, and mining. This is a way of thinking about development which in my view has been thoroughly discredited around the world. And so when the local people say we don't want it, instead of listening to the local people and listening, because they're obviously the people who are in the best position to judge what will improve their lives and increase their well-being. Instead of listening to them, they say, well, you're obviously too stupid to understand how this is going to benefit you. So unfortunately, there's been an incredible amount of paternalism here, where government and outside commentators simply do not accept that local people are able to articulate what they want and what they don't want. And so as a result, the consultation processes have been a bit like, well, we'll listen to you as long as you parrot back to us what you want, what we want to hear. But in situations where it doesn't go like that, it's been quite disturbing to see the lengths that people will go to distort the truth and hide it from the South African public. In this litigation, they've put up affidavits, documents which they said were affidavits signed by local people supporting the road. And they weren't. They weren't even affidavits. Some of the signatures were forged, and they couldn't even identify the people who'd signed them. In other words, they were attempting to manufacture consent. They've done this many, many times during this process. And they get a few people who are prepared to support the road, and then they make statements on affidavit that they're meetings where the whole community supports the road, etc. It's absolute nonsense. We have documents with signatures of hundreds and hundreds of people from these communities saying, I do not want this road, I want to support the litigation to prevent the road going ahead. Perhaps the most significant issue about this was the first time I went there, people impressed upon me time and time again that one of the things they value incredibly highly is community cohesion. The community stands together. That's how they've survived throughout history, and a lot of people are related to each other. And something like this comes along and it divides the community, and it divides family against family. It's deeply traumatic for people, and particularly when violence then emerges, it's even more devastating for a community.
Well, Margie, you're the chair of Sustaining the Wild Coast, and you've come along, in the last 2 or 3 years to sustain us, those of us who are like the early pioneers of this process. Just say something about what got you involved and why this is important for you to donate so much of your voluntary time and effort and commitment to this.
It was 3 or 4 years ago that I hiked from Port Edward to Port St. John's with a group of women, and Sinagugu Sukula was our guide, and it was the most amazing experience. I had experienced the Wild Coast before, but not in that way. We walked for 7 days over a distance of 100 kilometers, staying in people's homes along the way, and it really was a remarkable experience, being able to walk through areas where people were farming, staying in people's homes, walking through areas where there were no fences, and really experiencing a different South Africa to the South Africa that I knew. I grew up on a commercial sugarcane farm. People were employed to work for farmers. They weren't working for themselves. And in Pondoland, for the first time, I saw the dignity of Indigenous people living and working their own land, and that was profoundly significant for me. And then soon after that, apart from being entertained and delighted with Sinagugu's knowledge of the history, the culture, the biodiversity of that area. So for a group of white women, it was a significant experience of being welcomed into black people's homes, invited to share their lifestyles.
Well, Cormac, you've been involved now for a long time. No disrespect to lawyers generally, but I haven't seen too many of them who are ready to go so many extra miles that you've been.
Well, certainly when I started the process, I had a black beard, not a grey beard. And it's been a very long road. But I think that I feel that what is being proposed there is a fundamental injustice, in the sense that it's going to take a particularly beautiful part of the world and it's going to set off a process which will destroy that really special place. It'll be a destruction of wildness, it'll be a destruction of beauty, it'll be a destruction of biodiversity, and it'll be a destruction of the way of life of the Amampondo people. That's not to say, by the way, that this is some kind of noble savage argument that these people are living an idyllic life and it should be preserved. The real issue is to recognize and respect the right of a people to self-determination, to make the decisions about how their culture is going to evolve in the future. And the people there are incredibly clear about it. They have given about 10 pages to the provincial government, which sets out precisely what they mean by development. Changes that the government could make, such as upgrading local roads, building schools and clinics, etc., which would increase the well-being of the people. Development, unfortunately, is understood by government as building things and increasing GDP, regardless of whether it improves or decreases the well-being of people. And unfortunately, that development model must pass. We cannot continue on this planet if we believe that the task of humanity is to destroy nature and to degrade the planet and turn it into concrete. What we have to recognize is that when we talk about development, we shouldn't be talking about roads and assuming that that's development and it's automatically good. Development should be about human development. In other words, enabling people to live richer and more fulfilling lives. And it also should not be done in a way which degrades the environment that supports all life. So if you look at it from that lens, it's quite clear that this road is an undesirable thing, and that there are many better ways of spending money in that area which will improve the well-being of the people and not destroy the environment, and thereby leave open the option for sustainable futures, for ecotourism, for agriculture, etc., that will last for indefinitely.
That's it.
Well, press has been kicked out.
There are so many things that happen on the ground that we don't get to know about.
No, they locked the door and closed us out.
Our delegation today consisted of a number of senior ministers from national...
I must ask, would the mining be feasible if that road does not take the current proposed route?
But we cannot answer that question. That's a question that a private company that's interested in mining must answer.
Would you have the power to veto a mining decision from any other department?
It is one area that is still with the Minister of Mineral and Energy Affairs and not with the Department of the Environment.
We passed a law in 2002 which stipulates that before you start any mining operations, you have to consult with the local people. That includes the Royal House.
We feel we have not consulted enough, and it is now that we are going to have a very strong consultation around these issues.
Yeah, as I said, it's both my view as well as that of the department that we don't think that Pondoland deserves mining.
It's interesting because in our first round, when the whole proposal was set aside by the Minister of Environment in 2005 with the first round, because the environmental consultant was found to have actually had shares in one of the companies that was going to be getting this concession to Toland.
How these unsolicited bids work is you come up with the idea that you should spend a lot of money building a road, and then you have to show the government that it's worth spending the money. So you do a cost-benefit analysis, and it's very easy to get an economist to say, well, if we save a bit of distance and we multiply it by the number of vehicles that are going to pass through there, etc., over a great number of years, there'll be a huge benefit to the economy. Now, what you do in that situation is...
Just want to make sure it's going to carry on.
That's okay. So it's very easy to get a cost-benefit analysis which shows that a road should happen, because it only looks at economics. It doesn't look at the opportunity costs of losing the potential for ecotourism, for example, in the long term. It doesn't look on at the negative impacts on the local people. And one of the ways in which they do this is that they make over-optimistic assumptions about how the economy is going to grow, and hence how road traffic is going to increase, and hence how the savings from the shortened road are going to escalate over time. The assumptions that were made in the studies that were carried out around about 2010 in this matter were complete. No, the studies were, I think, 2002. 2008.
2008.
In this case, studies were carried out in approximately 2008, and they made completely unrealistic assumptions about how traffic was going to increase. Since then, there's been a global recession. A lot has changed, and it's been very clear that all those assumptions were wrong, and that as a consequence of that era and others, the benefits of the road have been grossly overstated. So it seems absolutely logical that at the very least one needs to relook at these numbers now, because these decisions to spend in excess of 8 billion of public money are being taken on the basis of reports which we now know to be wrong. And to me, it's totally irrational not to relook at the numbers and see if they produce those benefits. But of course, even if the economics are do show that there would be a benefit to the economy as a whole, it doesn't take into effect that it may be harmful to local people, and there are many other factors that need to be taken into consideration.
The struggle that ought to have really been resolved rationally over a decade ago is still on the table.
Unfortunately, this project, as with several others which SANRAL is undertaking throughout South Africa, did not involve proper consultation with local people. Consultation was seen as simply something you had to go through the motions of, hold a few meetings, then tick that box and move on. But there are actually court cases in which the judge has said to Nazir Ali, consultation means that you must solicit people's views with an open mind and be prepared to change your mind in response to the information and feedback you get from people. And that's what didn't happen here. And you know, for people who don't live in the area, it perhaps seems like a reasonable thing to do to put a highway through that will be in the good, for the good of South Africa, is the argument. But can you imagine if your people have lived on a land for countless generations? This is the land which is the birthplace of the Amampondo people. This is a situation where people are living the kind of sustainable lives that modern society is trying to relearn how to live. In other words, they're people who can look after their own well-being and feed themselves and fend for themselves. Yes, they would like better roads so that they can get to the hospitals, etc. But what they don't want is a big through road which will be fenced on both sides that they probably won't even be able to use, and if they are able to use it, they'll have to pay to use it. The roads that needs to be improved that go between the people, where the people live, and the hospitals and the schools and the churches and the shops are roads which go more or less at right angles to the coast. Those are the roads that need to be upgraded first. So, but can you imagine if you'd always lived in a place, your ancestors had always lived in a place, and somebody came and told you that without your consent and without even answering your questions about how it would affect you, they were going to build this big road right through where you live, a road that was going to probably cut you off from your rest of your family. It was going to make it difficult for you to move your cattle around to dip them. It was going to set off a process of urban development where outsiders would move in, take over the land and completely disrupt the society that you lived in. And that this was being done post-1994 in a democratic South Africa without even sitting down with the communities and answering their questions and allowing them to debate the issue. I suggest that anybody would be outraged in those circumstances.
The fact is that it happens to coincidentally go within a couple of kilometres of the Kolobeni Mineral Sands project, which is supposedly 10th largest titanium deposit in the world, Yet SANRAL have consistently denied that there's any sort of, shall we say, ontological connection with that, or any sort of like planning concept. Do you buy that?
SANRAL always tries to say that there's absolutely no connection whatsoever between the mining and the road. In fact, the minerals have been known about for a long time, before the road was planned. It's not correct what SANRAL says, that the minerals were discovered later. But whether or not there was actual collusion between the prospective mining companies and SANRAL doesn't really matter, because the issue is that many previous attempts to mine those areas were abandoned because it was too expensive to extract the minerals. If you have to build a big road in there that's capable of bearing the load of ore-bearing trucks, then it's very, very expensive. But if the government comes along and builds you a nice big road within a few kilometers of where you want to mine, it fundamentally changes the cost-benefit analysis, and it makes that mining financially viable. So whether there was direct collusion or not, the effect of building that road is that it makes mining viable, and it makes it much more likely that that area will be mined with devastating consequences for the local environment and the local people.
There's something that's in all of our interests to take up this issue.
Indigenous people who live with an awareness of their dependence on the earth have a message for us, and that's the message that I hear the Amampondo speaking out. We are so conditioned in South Africa to believing that mining is an essential part of our survival, and the Amampondo are saying, whoa, think, take it slow. Mining has huge impact on people's lives, on social cohesion, on the environment. And it's like, as Western people, Western colonial settlers, we've forgotten. We don't see it as clearly. And Indigenous people seem to really have an important role to play in reminding us of what's important and what our survival depends upon. And also that the earth is there not just to be used, but to be respected as something sacred and as something much bigger, more mysterious than we.
I checked in your Facebook page the other day, and I happened to see that you had checked into Standing Rock and that you had left South Africa. What on earth is this all about?
I was with Sinagugu.
Yes,
and a whole lot of others from around the world.
Cormac, if you can just say a little bit from your long experience as one of the pioneers of earth jurisprudence and wild law, why does this matter to us as a human species in general?
Margie expressed the Indigenous perspective beautifully, and particularly focusing on the word dignity. Indigenous people throughout the world have a deep sense of connection, not just with each other, but with the natural world, and they understand the natural world as something sacred to be protected. You can see that very clearly in Standing Rock. People say very clearly, we're not protesting, we're protecting. We are protecting the water. It is our duty to protect this water, not just for ourselves, but also for future generations, for life itself. And that is the worldview which is also reflected among the Amampondo people. The elders of that society, people like Samson Gampe, they stand very, very strong. They say we are indigenous to this land, like the trees, like the Nsensi tree. We are of this place, and with that comes obligations to protect that place. And there can be no compromise about that. It is a deep obligation, and it must be respected. And it is very humbling when you meet people like that and you hear the depth of their conviction. And they're absolutely right. It is we who've been brought up in a world to disrespect nature, Mother Earth, if you like, that are incorrect. So there are absolutely very, very direct parallels between the two, and I'm quite sure, I know some of the people involved in Standing Rock, and I'm quite sure that they would stand shoulder to shoulder with the Amampondo if they were here, because they see things in the same way, and in my view, their view is correct. In the early years of the 21st century, there is no more important duty, no more sacred obligation on humanity than to protect and preserve and restore our damaged earth. And quite frankly, we can do without toll roads, and we can do without more concrete. But what we can't do without is water and places which not only nourish the people and support them, but also nourish us in a spiritual and intellectual way.
Okay, last question. Thomas Berry is your great inspiration. You talked about the dream of the earth. What is your dream for the future? What is the new narrative that you see? We want people to give money to this cause. What's the vision they're buying? It's not just simply to curse the darkness, it's to do something more. Sum up for us, both of you, what it is that you think are a good reason for people to support Sinagugu in his struggle, financially.
Right now, there are people investing billions of rands in bringing about a future which will be deeply harmful to humanity. More concrete, more roads, more despoilation of wild areas, more undermining of indigenous communities. They are investing in that future, and they intend to make that future happen. If we want a different future to happen, we need to invest in what we believe in. We need to invest time and energy and money and love and commitment to bring about the future that we see, and the future that I want to invest in for myself and for my children and for my grandchildren is a future in which we actively seek to be good citizens of the earth, good members of the earth community, where we seek to achieve human fulfillment and human well-being, and to better ourselves through creating a better and more integral world. In other words, working with nature so that we all benefit, rather than this terrible colonial point of view that the only way for me to get ahead is for me to take something from either my fellow human beings or from nature, and it doesn't matter if it degrades the future. So there's a beautiful future out there. The problem is between our ears. We need to change our objective. If we change from a colonial take mindset to receiving, to understanding that by giving and protecting this beautiful world, we'll all benefit. We can all be happier. The people in the Wild Coast can maintain their culture, maintain their lifestyles, and it can be improved with better roads and with support from outsiders.
It sounded like the Hadi-Dars thoroughly agreed with you on that. I mean, it comes down to questions of having to fight court cases, and why should people contribute to this cause and get involved, and how can they help us?
There's a hope that there's still a chance to do things differently on the Wild Coast. There's a window of opportunity for people to improve their lives in the kind of way that hasn't happened elsewhere in South Africa. So it's not about building roads and cities, or big commercial farming or mining. It's about growing local economies. And we all need to find different and new ways of doing economics all over the world. We need to find ways to do things differently, and it feels like Pondoland is a place where that could happen. The other thing is that Pondoland could be an incredible place of learning for South Africans, and I think particularly for young people. There's an amazing hiking experience that can happen there, where kids get out of the comfort zones of their homes and TVs and cell phones and out of the cities and go and learn a different way of living. And it's a place where our Western ideas of the good life can be challenged.
I think the fundamental challenge facing humanity in the 21st century is, are we going to accept the reality that we are incredibly privileged to be born into the most beautiful community of life we've been able to find in the entire universe, and that our primary duty is to protect the integrity and health of that community so that we and other species can live well? Or are we going to carry on with this doomed project of attempting to dominate and exploit the earth in in the mistaken belief that by taking and taking and taking, we will somehow win and benefit in the long run. And this case, the situation in the Wild Coast, is an example of the battle between two opposing worldviews. The one worldview places money as the top value and says that the most important thing is to carry on increasing gross domestic product and growing the economy, and one of the ways of doing that is to build big expensive roads and big expensive bridges, and that will of course increase GDP. And they say the fact that some species may go extinct, some ancient communities may lose their culture, that areas which have been unspoiled may be opened up to urban development, is essentially an acceptable price to pay for that. The other point of view, which has been beautifully articulated by Margie, is that there are much more important things in life. That beauty, being able to support yourself in a way which doesn't degrade the environment, that culture and connection both to other people and to land are very, very important things which should not be lightly squandered. And even more importantly, why should outsiders be able to come and impose their will against a community without even consulting them properly? So the one is a worldview which is about money, GDP, control and domination and exploitation of nature and people. And the other is a worldview which is based on enhancing life, saying we want human beings to reach their full potential in a way that is harmonious with the beautiful community of life that we live in, and that in the long term it's not possible for human well-being and human rights to be maintained at the expense of the ecosystems that support us. So there is a way forward here. The way forward here is to spend less money but spend it better on improving things which the community tell you will improve their lives, but not destroying that particularly spectacular part of South Africa simply because some road engineers and road building companies would prefer people to be able to move faster between Durban and East London, or because they want to increase their profits, or because of some misconception that employing people to destroy nature and destroy culture is a good thing. Jobs are not necessarily a good thing. It depends what they're for. Some jobs are good and increase human well-being, and some jobs are simply exist in the service of profit and exploitation, and it would be better if they weren't created.
How much money are we needing? How much do we need to get into the bank to kind of make that happen?
It would be nice if we didn't need money and we didn't need laws.
I think what we want is we want people who support this vision of the world, of the future, and who want to support that area, and who want to be able perhaps to take their children to see that beautiful area one day, or their grandchildren. We want them to say, let me put aside not a donation but a small amount every month as an investment in that future. I give up a cappuccino a week, whatever, but say I'm going to commit a small amount or a large amount every month into the future as an investment to see that kind of world emerges, and to invest in the kind of future that I want to see. Because if we don't do that, those that are investing in its destruction will prevail.
I think it's also, John, about inviting people to journey with us in learning. It's not, we don't just want people's money, we want people to join us in listening and thinking and learning. And not just giving money to the Wild Coast. I want to fund your Wild Law project, which, as I understand it, will create a fund that can be used for protecting different places, and that fund will kind of keep going, because you'll win the cases and you'll get awarded costs, and the money will go back into that fund and enable you to fight the next battle, because Cormac is only one of many battles happening around the country. But I think that's another point that should be mentioned, is that we hope on the Wild Coast to create precedents legal precedents that will enable other, mining affected communities around South Africa to resist, mining or other destructive projects. So if people want to support the Wild Coast, they should see it not just as supporting that particular community, but they should see it as a way of growing a movement in South Africa that will generate and grow awareness and create resources that will support a different way of living for all of us.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say, what Cheryl said, it's not a hardship, it's not a burden. It is a sacrifice in the sense that you have to give up something in order to get this. But it's a bit like the pearl of great price. It's something, well, this is valuable and I'm prepared to make this sacrifice. And I think that really, in a sense, that's the new economy that we're looking for, one which is based on sacrificial giving rather than on a simply gimme.
John, I think there are a lot of people who want to make a difference and who want to be part of a movement that's bigger than themselves, who want to be part of a movement that protects the earth and promotes mutual respect between peoples and between people and the earth. And what's happening on the Wild Coast is that kind of movement.
Well, folk, there you have it. Wild lawyer Cormac Cullinan and our green fingers Margie Pretorius, who tells me that she's been far more productive in Joburg growing vegetables in a beautiful permaculture sort of setup here than she ever was when she actually lived on a farm.
Oh